listen to that. Just a rhythmic mechanical clicking, like a ticking clock.
Right. Very precise, very
Yeah,
exact.
tick, tick, tick. And notice how over just the span of a few moments, that tiny clicking starts to deepen.
Oh, yeah, it stretches out.
Exactly. The pitch drops, right? The resonance expands, and that delicate ticking transforms into this heavy, industrial, just powerful thrum of a massive ship's engine.
It's intense.
It is. It's this giant machine operating with relentless calibration.
Which is, I mean, it is the auditory signature of a system operating within its optimal parameters. You hear that and you know every valve, every piston, every feedback loop.
It's functioning entirely as designed.
Exactly. There's zero wasted energy there.
Yeah.
It's only forward calculated momentum.
Okay, so I want you to hold that industrial rhythm in your mind because we're going to layer something completely different over it right now.
Okay.
We are going to introduce an audio cliche. Picture the reverb-heavy acoustics of a giant ancient room, like a huge hall.
Right. Lots of echo.
Yeah, and someone is at a pulpit and they're weeping. They are just sobbing, pleading, begging this invisible authority for forgiveness.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a very different vibe.
Totally chaotic, right? It's messy and it's intensely emotional. I mean, think of the modern apology tour.
Right. Like when a public figure gets caught in a scandal.
Exactly. They sit in front of a camera, they cry, they talk about how bad they feel, but, their underlying behavior never actually changes. The emotion is like it's performing the work of the repair.
Which is a fundamental error in logic.
Right.
Because the weeping produces a high output of psychological noise, sure, but zero structural change. The system remains fundamentally broken despite, the volume of the tear.
Yeah, the engine is still broken, so keep both sounds running in your head. The perfect engine and the messy, performative weeping.
Okay.
Because right at the crescendo of those sobs, we are going to completely shatter that emotional audio, just rip it apart with a sharp, jarring, digital glitch.
Like a corrupted file crashing.
Exactly, abruptly cutting off the weeping and leaving us with nothing but the steady, mechanical thrum of that engine once again.
Welcome to today's deep dive.
Isn't it a jarring transition?
It is. And you should consider this a complete and total navigation reset.
Yeah, because today's operating framework, it comes from a really fascinating text by J.R. Ahmed. It's titled Tawbah, the Architecture of Trajectory Calibration.
And the mission for this deep dive is highly, highly specific. We are going to take a concept that has been just buried under centuries of cultural and emotional baggage, specifically the concept of repentance.
Right.
And we are going to expose its true original nature. Based on Ahmed's text, we are moving away from the pulpit. We are moving away from the crying apology videos.
Stripping all that away.
Yeah. We are stripping away the idea that correcting a human error is an emotional guilt trip.
Because we need to look at the systemic implications of restorative justice. The argument presented here is that, well, human error and its subsequent correction, it's not a passive emotional feeling of guilt. Yeah.
It is a highly logical structural correction mechanism.
Okay, but I want to stop right there because I want to challenge the premise before we even really get into the weeds because, well, bridging the gap between those two ideas seems massive to me.
It is a massive gap.
Right. Like, how does an ancient word, a concept deeply embedded in all these religious and spiritual traditions, how does it mutate from describing a mechanical system's correction into the purely emotional guilt trip we see today?
It's a great question.
I mean, if the original code was so structural, why did the human operating system downgrade it to just feeling bad?
Well, it is a profound observation, and it really points to a historical degradation of language, particularly when structural concepts intersect with human ego and institutionalized culture over time.
Okay, so ego gets in the way.
Exactly. The text posits that feeling passive guilt requires significantly less caloric and psychological energy than executing a structural change.
Oh, wow. Yeah, crying is easier than building.
Precisely. Over centuries, popular culture reduced this demanding architectural framework into an emotional cycle. Because, yeah, crying is easier than rebuilding. You feel immense guilt, you mechanically repeat these verbal apologies, and society just gives you a pass.
Like checking a box.
Right. But that completely detaches the individual from logical analysis, from strict behavioral adjustment, and real-world restitution.
So you feel terrible, you do the apology tour, but the broken system hasn't been touched at all. The damage is still exactly there.
Yes. The glitch in how we view human error is that we mistake the alarm bell for the fire extinguisher.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to put it.
The guilt is just the alarm.
Right.
And to understand how to actually put out the fire, Ahmed's text argues we have to completely bypass the cultural translation.
Right. Ignore the centuries of baggage.
Exactly. And look at the literal source code of the concept. We have to examine the foundational, restorative architecture that's present in the original language.
Which brings us to what the text calls the atomic deconstruction. The author takes the classical Arabic root of this word, Qaba, and breaks it down into its phonosemantic baseline profile.
Right.
And I need to pause here because phonosemantic baseline profile, that is a massive piece of academic jargon.
It is a mouthful.
It really is. And I don't want to just gloss over this. What are we actually talking about when we say phonosemantist?
It is a really critical distinction to make, especially for English speakers. Because in many modern languages, the connection between a word's sound and its meaning is, well, it's entirely arbitrary.
Like a tree sounds like a tree just because we all kind of agreed it does.
Right. There's nothing inherently tree-like about the sound. But in classical Arabic, the linguistics operate on a much more structural level. Phonosemantics suggests that the very physical sound of a letter,
Like the actual shape your mouth makes?
yes, the shape of your mouth, the airflow required to produce this sound. It mirrors the fundamental reality of the concept it represents. The letters are not arbitrary symbols. They are acoustic models of physical and conceptual realities.
Okay, so the word isn't just a label, it's more like an equation. It describes a sequence of physical events.
Exactly. The text treats the root TWB as an operational formula comprising three distinct variables, ta, wa, and ba.
TWB.
Right. And by examining the phonosemantic profile of each of those letters, we are essentially reading lines of code that dictate how a system recovers from a deviated trajectory.
Okay, let's read the code then. Let's start with variable 1, ta, the Arabic letter ta. The text defines this as, quote, the terminal state.
The terminal state.
Yeah. It represents the completion of a cycle, right? The end of a sequence or a finalized fixed boundary. So if we are looking at a system drifting completely out of bounds, the ta is the hard stop. It terminates the bad run.
Well, look at the function of a terminal state in any dynamic system. You cannot begin a correction protocol if the system is still currently executing the error.
Right.
Tom represents the absolute cessation of the harmful vector. In human terms, it is the immediate, non-negotiable cessation of the destructive behavior.
I'm kind of stuck on this idea of an absolute halt, though. I mean, human behavior isn't software.
No, it's definitely messier.
Yeah. If I'm trying to quit a highly addictive, toxic habit, maybe a substance, or even just chronic lying, it is rarely an instant clean stop. People taper off, they relapse. So is the text arguing that if you are slowly reducing the harm, you haven't actually initiated the Tom protocol?
The text is establishing a theoretical baseline for trajectory calibration. From a strict engineering standpoint, a vector cannot be reversed while forward thrust is still being applied.
Even if that thrust is reduced.
Even if it's reduced. Tapering off might be a very necessary psychological strategy for a human being, sure. But the mechanical reality of Tawbah cannot be truly engaged until the forward motion of the error hits a terminal boundary.
A hard stop.
Ta is the functional acknowledgement that the current path has ended. It is the wall, because without the wall, there is no pivot point.
Okay, I get it. You have to take your foot entirely off the gas pedal of the bad habit before you can even attempt to shift gears.
Exactly.
Okay, that moves us to variable 2. Wa, the text calls this the binding coordinator.
The coordinator.
Yeah, this is about conjunction and integration. It is the structural coordination between different nodes in a system. So if ta is hitting the brakes, wa is the tether. It's the mechanism that hooks the rogue element back into the primary network.
And notice the necessary sequence here. You asked about tapering off earlier.
Yeah.
What happens if an agent attempts to execute wa, rebinding to the optimal network, without first executing ta?
Oh, they try to connect to the healthy system while still running the virus.
Precisely. And what happens then?
The system crashes. Or I guess the connection is violently rejected.
Exactly. You cannot integrate a corrupted, actively drifting node into a stable network. Wa is the active realignment of the trajectory, but it is entirely dependent on the terminal state being achieved first.
That makes total sense.
Once the drift is halted, Wa represents the cognitive and structural effort of pointing the system back toward its operational baseline. It is the bridge.
which leads directly into the final variable, ba. And the text translates this as the local interface.
The local interface.
Yeah, it implies containment, immediate proximity, or the specific localized point of contact where an operation is actually executed.
So think about why proximity matters in systems repair. You cannot fix a systemic issue from an abstract, detached position.
Right.
If a pipe bursts in your home, contemplating fluid dynamics from your living room sofa accomplishes absolutely nothing.
No, your house is still flooding.
Exactly. You have to move down to the basement, access the specific valve, and apply localized force. It demands that the correction occurs at the exact site of the failure.
It grounds it.
It grounds the abstract desire to change into a highly localized physical execution.
Okay, wow. The synthesis of these three atomic elements, tup, wa, and ba, it completely rewrites our understanding of the whole concept.
That does.
When you integrate the terminal state, the binding coordinator, and the local interface, the root TWB does not translate to, like, feel sad and apologize.
Not at all.
The phonosemantics literally spell out an exact operational reversal. A system or an agent drifts out of bounds. It hits the terminal state, tup, halting the harmful deviation. It engages the binding coordinator, WAP, to realign its trajectory, and it hooks back into the primary network right at the immediate local interface, BA.
Right. And taking a broader perspective on systems engineering and information processing, any moving agent, whether it's a complex algorithmic model, a mechanical component in a spacecraft, or just a human life, it inevitably encounters friction.
Errors are bound to happen.
Errors are not an anomaly. They are a statistical certainty. A system will encounter drifts, noisy data, or negative feedback loops that pull it away from optimal performance.
And if that system lacks a self-correcting function, the drift doesn't just sit there, it compounds.
It multiplies exponentially.
Yeah.
Until you reach a state of cascading failure, resulting in a catastrophic crash. Ahmed's text posits that Tawbah is the built-in structural correction mechanism for the human operating system.
It's a feature, not a bug.
It is an active, rational process. You evaluate the negative feedback, terminate the harmful vector, and realign operational habits with the primary laws of reality.
I want to ground this in a modern analogy before we look at the historical one the text provides. Think about debugging software.
Go ahead.
If you write a bad line of code and your program gets caught in an infinite loop and it's just eating up all the memory on your processor, what do? You don't sit in your chair and cry over the keyboard.
No, yeah.
You don't beg the compiler to just ignore the bad code and run the program anyway.
Because the compiler is an objective entity.
Mm-hmm.
It does not possess the capacity to care about your emotional distress.
Right.
It only reads the logic of the code.
Right. The weeping is entirely useless. To fix the infinite loop, you have to execute the atomic variables. You isolate the bug and hit the terminal state, ta. You stop the loop.
Yes.
Then you write the correct syntax, rebinding the variable to the correct function, that's the wa, and you execute that change right there on the specific line of code where the error occurred, which is the local interface, bo.
It's a perfect parallel. And the author provides a vivid historical application of this exact mechanic that predates modern computing by millennia.
Right.
Because to understand the origins of this operational reversal, we have to look at the environment where this language actually evolved, the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the desert.
Oh, the foley for this scene in the text is incredible.
It really is.
The text paints a picture of a wild runaway camel sprinting through deep desert sand, and I want you to imagine the frantic, heavy sounds of that.
The hooves hitting the sand.
Pure panic, just burning crucial caloric energy, heading straight out into the dangerous, featureless, open desert.
And in the context of nomadic desert survival, a runaway animal is not just an inconvenience.
No, it's life or death.
It is a high-friction pathway leading directly to a catastrophic crash. If that animal continues its current vector, it will die of exhaustion and dehydration. And the human, depending on it, may perish as well. It is a mathematical certainty.
But then suddenly the sound of those heavy, frantic hooves halts. The camel just stops.
It hits the terminal state.
The destructive route is terminated, and then you hear the slow, deliberate footsteps of that animal turning completely around and walking back to the safety of the herd and the master's enclosure.
And classical Arabic uses the word taba for that exact spatial movement.
Just the physical turning around.
Notice the absolute absence of emotion in that scenario. The camel does not feel moral guilt.
It's a camel.
Right. It does not perform an apology. It executes a spatial, mathematical course correction to ensure survival.
Hmm.
Tawbah was a brutal survival protocol before it was ever a religious term.
Wow.
It is entirely
Yeah.
about recognizing a fatal trajectory, stopping, and returning to the safety of the established network.
The physical spatial metaphor of the camel is brilliant because it takes us out of our own heads.
It grounds it.
It really bridges the gap between the internal linguistic source code and the external observable world, which leads us to a massive question.
Okay.
Because we have established the mechanics of this internal turn, the individual terminating their own error and rebinding to the baseline. But human beings don't exist in a vacuum. We aren't solitary camels wandering alone.
No, we live in societies.
Right. So how does this mathematical concept survive contact with other human beings? How does it scale up to sociological frameworks and human justice?
This is where the framework transitions from individual mechanics to what the text calls the law of symmetric restorative justice.
Symmetric.
Because if Tawbah is a structural mechanism, its execution cannot remain confined to private psychological space.
Yeah.
It must manifest in the physical world of human interactions and societal structures.
So it has to be visible.
Exactly. The text cross-references the internal consistency of this root word across different contexts. Specifically, it analyzes Surah at Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 11.
Yes, I have that here. The text uses this verse to outline the systemic criteria required for an individual to enter, or I guess re-enter, a mutual protection network within a society. And the criteria are not vague suggestions. They are locked, explicitly defined gates.
Right. The analysis of the verse reveals a fascinating sequence. It states, but if they turn back and recalibrate,
There's the execution of taboo.
exactly, and establish systemic alignment and give the purifying charity, then they are your brothers in the system.
Okay, I want to break down those requirements because it completely destroys the modern apology tour concept.
It shatters it.
It links the recalibration, the turning back, directly to establishing systemic alignment and giving purifying charity.
Yes. It proves definitively that within this framework, the concept of return is an objective behavioral shift coupled with visible, measurable socioeconomic contributions.
But I'm stuck on the phrase purifying charity. Why is charity functioning as a system stabilizer here?
It's an interesting question.
Like, if I lie to my neighbor, fixing my internal code is one thing. But how does giving charity mechanically act as a structural repair in a sociological framework?
To understand that, we must look at societal trust as a quantifiable resource.
Okay.
When an individual drifts from the baseline, whether through theft, deceit, or exploitation, they create an artificial imbalance in the socioeconomic network.
I've taken something.
They have extracted value, whether material or psychological, without providing symmetric return. Purifying charity in this context is not a benevolent favor. It is a literal wealth redistribution mechanism.
Oh, wow. It acts as a counterweight.
Exactly. By actively dispensing resources back into the network, the individual mathematically recalibrates the imbalance caused by their initial drift.
So you can't just say, oh, I've recalibrated my heart, I feel really bad about my actions, but I'm keeping the money I hoarded and I'm not going to participate in the social system.
The network rejects that.
The recalibration is rejected by the system unless it is proven by economic and systemic action.
The network demands tangible proof of the turn.
That is so practical, and the author goes even further to establish the uncompromising nature of this process. The text introduces the invariable prerequisite of reform.
Yes, pointing to Surah al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 160.
Right. And here, it details the functional conditions required for halting systemic decay once damage has actually been done. I have this section highlighted, and it leaves absolutely no room for interpretation.
It's very explicit.
It lists 3 absolute prerequisites for a valid return. It says, except those who turn back and recalibrate, which is tabu, and reform, walaba, and declare the truth, wabayani.
Recalibrate, reform, declare the truth. 3 structural pillars. From a rationalist perspective, this establishes an unbreakable law of physics for human interaction. A true return, a successful system calibration, is mathematically impossible without active rectification.
Which the text identifies as ELO.
Right. And absolute clarity, Van. The damage caused by the previous drift must be practically and visibly repaired.
Okay, let's explore the mechanics of WALO, the reform and repair, because this is where the rubber really meets the road for most people. Think about a person who recklessly throws a rock and shatters your living room window in the middle of a freezing winter night.
Okay, a clear deviation from optimal performance.
Extremely clear.
They have introduced a destructive vector into your immediate environment.
A massive drift. Now, that person realizes what they've done. They hit the terminal state. They stop throwing rocks.
Right.
They walk up to your lawn shivering, crying, feeling immense, genuine guilt, and there's screaming apologies at you. But let's look at the reality of the situation.
The physics of it.
Yes, just feeling bad about it is utterly useless to you as you sit freezing inside your house.
Completely useless.
The apology doesn't stop the draft. The guilt doesn't keep the snow off your floor.
The emotional display is entirely asymmetrical to the physical damage.
Yes. To execute ILA, to actually reform the situation, the perpetrator has to physically walk to the hardware store. They have to buy the glass with their own money. They have to clear away the broken shards. They have to install the new pane and seal the draft.
That is the structural repair.
So my question is, based on Ahmed's text, does the universe mathematically reject the so-called repentance if that physical repair hasn't been made?
Yes.
Like if they just walk away crying, does the system classify them as uncalibrated?
According to the architecture outlined in the source, the answer is an unequivocal yes. It is an incomplete sequence.
Wow.
Returning to your software analogy from earlier, it would be identical to identifying a critical bug, feeling immense regret that you wrote it, maybe even documenting the bug, but never actually typing in the corrected line of code.
The program will still crash.
The broken window still lets in the freezing air. The text is very clear. Human choices are never neutral. Every action is a vector with real-world mass and velocity.
And bad choices generate immense psychological and physical friction. When an individual lies, cheats, or harms others, they aren't just making an abstract mistake in a vacuum.
No, they are tearing the fabric of the network.
They are actively drifting down a high-friction pathway. This pathway builds up tangible psychological stress within the individual, and it demonstrably breaks the signaling mechanisms of social trust within the community.
And you cannot resolve physical and psychological friction with purely abstract, unexpressed emotion. An apology without repair is actually a secondary offense.
A secondary offense. How so?
It insults the victim's reality by suggesting their tangible suffering can be balanced by the perpetrator's invisible feelings.
Oh, that is powerful. It really is an insult.
It is.
And that perfectly sets up the third pillar, Wabeanu, to declare the truth or clarity. Because why is clarity an absolute prerequisite? Why isn't it enough to just, fix the window in the middle of the night and walk away anonymously?
Because deceit and obfuscation introduce noise into a system's signaling network.
Okay, noise.
Think of it in terms of information asymmetry. If a system's sensors are receiving false data, calibration is impossible. When a person hides their drift or obscures the truth of their actions, they are forcing the people around them to operate on corrupted data.
They're flying blind.
Exactly. Bayon demands total transparency because you cannot reintegrate into a network of trust if you are still radiating false signals. Clarity is the mechanism that purges the noise from the system.
Recalibrate, repair, clarify. It is a ruthless, beautiful logic.
It is very elegant.
And it brings us to a metaphor in the text that I think perfectly synthesizes everything we've talked about today. The high-level sociological laws, the linguistic history, and the immediate, everyday psychology of you, the listener.
Right, tying it all together.
Because we've talked about software code, we've talked about desert camels, we've talked about broken windows, but the text asks you to imagine driving a car.
It is the most visceral translation of the mechanics.
It really is. Imagine you were driving a car down a long highway in the middle of the night. Your dashboard map clearly indicates that to reach your destination, your safe home, you must follow the main straight road.
The baseline trajectory.
Right. It's well lit, it's paved, and it's structurally stable. But, as human beings are prone to do, you experience a lapse in attention.
You get distracted.
You get distracted. You ignore a series of warning signs, and you make a wrong turn down a dark, unpaved track.
You have initiated a deviation from the primary network. You are now operating outside of optimal parameters.
And I want you to really imagine the sensory experience as you drive deeper down this wrong path. The environment degrades rapidly.
It gets rough.
The road becomes incredibly bumpy, full of deep ruts. You hear the suspension of the car groaning under the stress. You hear your tires starting to slip and spin, losing traction in thick, wet mud.
Building friction.
The smell of burning rubber fills the cabin. The engine is straining, whining at a high, desperate pitch because it's overheating. And just beyond the dim beam of your headlights, you can vaguely make out the shapes of dangerous, steep cliffs on either side of the track.
The systemic friction is compounding rapidly, the trajectory is totally unsustainable, and a catastrophic crash is imminent.
So, the text outlines two drastically different responses to this exact scenario.
Right.
The first is what it classifies as the foolish driver.
Okay.
This driver looks at the dashboard. They realize they are on the wrong road. They recognize the severe danger. They sit in the driver's seat, grip the steering wheel until their knuckles turn white, and they begin to cry about how terrible the road is.
Right. High emotional output.
They're consumed by fear and guilt. They might even roll down the window and yell apologies into the dark forest.
Right.
Their right foot is still fluidly, consistently pressing the accelerator. They are still moving forward, sinking the vehicle deeper and deeper into the mud.
That image perfectly encapsulates the cultural glitch we discussed at the beginning of the deep dive.
Exactly.
The emotional weeping at the pulpit, while the destructive behavior continues unabated in the background. The driver possesses emotional awareness of the error, sure, but the system is still running the bad code.
The engine is still revving.
The forward thrust has not been terminated. The apology is meaningless because the vector remains unchanged.
But then the text introduces the wise driver.
The alternative.
This driver practices the true structural architecture of Tawbah. The moment they look at the dashboard and recognize the danger, they don't waste energy on performative sorrow. They execute a sequence of actions.
They engage the mechanics.
Imagine the audio of this moment. The desperate, straining whine of the engine suddenly cuts out as they take their foot off the gas. Silence. Then, the heavy mechanical clunk of a transmission shifting gears. And finally, the rhythmic, powerful, controlled sound of a vehicle successfully engaging in reverse, pulling its own weight backward out of the thick mud and rotating completely around to face the main road.
Because they physically alter the physics of the vehicle. That active turnaround, the mechanical shift that saves the car from plunging off the cliff, is the exact functional definition of the concept.
Right.
It is not an emotional state. It is a kinetic event.
A kinetic event. And the author distills this kinetic event into a brilliant, actionable three-step checklist for anyone listening who finds themselves stuck in the mud of a bad habit, a toxic relationship, or a dishonest lifestyle.
It's very practical.
Step 1, stopping the drift. You have to hit the internal brakes. You must immediately halt the dishonest or harmful behavior. You take your foot off the gas.
And that aligns precisely with the tie variable,
Oh.
the terminal state. You must establish the absolute cessation of the harmful vector.
Right. Step 2, repairing the damage. The illa. You don't just ignore the past, and you don't pretend the mud isn't caked onto the tires.
You can't just pretend it didn't happen.
No. You do the hard, caloric work of practical reform. You fix the mistakes you made on that dark road. If you took something unfairly, you pay it back. You buy the glass, you sweep up the shards, and you install the new window.
This step is non-negotiable because it reestablishes the social trust that the deviation broke. It balances the socioeconomic and psychological equations. It proves to the network that you're no longer a rogue agent.
And finally, step 3, declaring the truth. The Bayonne. You live with total openness and clarity. You purge the noise from your signaling.
Complete transparency.
You ensure that your external actions perfectly match your internal conscience, so no one has to guess what road you are driving on. No more dark, hidden paths.
But this architectural breakdown raises a really profound philosophical question.
Okay, what is it?
Well, we have spent this entire discussion focusing on the individual agent. If you are the one steering the car out of the mud, if you are the one hitting the brakes, shifting the gears, and executing the repair, what is responding to you? When a system recalibrates, it must recalibrate to something.
Yes. The other side of the equation, we aren't just turning around in a void.
Exactly. This section of the text explores the feedback loop between the individual processor, you, the driver, and the overarching source, the system itself, or the creator. It calls this dynamic the dual reciprocal calibration.
The dual reciprocal calibration. I want to try and visualize this with an audio concept, leaning heavily into the Radiolab style we've been using.
Okay, set the scene.
Imagine wearing headphones, and the sound design shifts into this totally immersive stereo panning.
All right.
On your left side, you have the sharp, mechanical, active sounds of the person doing the hard work. The clunk of shifting the gears, the crunch of tires pulling out of the mud, the physical exertion.
The human element.
But panning slowly back and forth across your ears, oscillating between the left and the right channel, is this low-frequency, awe-inspiring hum, a massive, steady vibration of divine light.
Wow.
It represents the source, and it is actively interacting with the mechanical sound of the driver in a continuous, responsive balancing loop.
That auditory oscillation is actually a perfect representation of what the text highlights in Surah At-Tawbah, verse 118.
How so?
The author analyzes the specific phrasing and sequencing of the verse, which translates to. Then he turned to them, referring to the Creator turning to the individuals so that they might turn back.
Wait.
Or, utilizing the language of our text, he recalibrated toward them so that they might recalibrate.
He turned to them so that they might turn back. Hold on, that completely flips the script on the timeline of events.
It entirely inverts the traditional paradigm. It confirms that this root word, this mechanism, represents a highly interactive balancing loop where the Creator actually initializes the path.
This is a massive paradigm shift. I mean, under the old degraded cultural understanding we talked about at the start of the deep dive, you are down in the mud, crying, begging a reluctant, angry authority figure to please change his mind and let you off the hook.
Right.
You are trying to convince the system to accept your broken code.
You are attempting to negotiate with the physics of the universe using emotional leverage, which, as we established, is impossible.
It doesn't work. But under the architecture described in Ahmed's text, you aren't begging. You are recognizing a mathematical deficit with reality. You see the error, and you are executing a calculated turnaround.
Yes.
But the mind-blowing part is that the reason you can execute that turnaround, the reason the transmission even engages in reverse, is because the source has already opened the port.
The framework states that the Creator initializes the pathway by providing the opening, the awareness, and the data link.
It's pre-installed.
Yes. This pre-existing connection is what enables the drifted individual to execute their own cognitive and behavioral realignment. The system isn't trying to lock you out. It isn't a trap designed to catch you failing.
It wants you to succeed.
It is a highly resilient network designed to catch you recovering, but only if you initiate the protocol. The grace is in the architecture itself.
The grace is in the architecture. So we have to ask the ultimate question. What does this all mean for you, the listener?
Right, bringing it back to the individual.
For the person driving to work right now, or doing the dishes, or sitting at a desk trying to figure out how to fix a massive mess they've made in their own life, does this imply that the universe is essentially rigged for our success?
It's a bold thought.
If the source provides the initial data link for the reset, is reality itself biased toward calibration rather than condemnation?
That is the ultimate conclusion of the text's systemic synthesis. Tawbah is the master self-correction tool. An author explicitly argues that the Creator did not build a system of permanent condemnation.
It's not a one-strike system.
The universe does not want you to crash. It is not a fragile system waiting to be destroyed by your errors. Reality possesses a beautiful, constant, open port for correction.
No matter how far down that dark road you've driven, no matter how deep the mud is.
The systemic drift can be severe, we acknowledge that. The compounding errors can be massive, generating enormous friction and damage. But the mechanism of Tawbah guarantees that you always inherently possess the power to reset the system.
It's built in.
It is a universal law of survival encoded into the human operating system. Human beings are built with the absolute capacity to change, to hit the terminal state, to rebind to the optimal network, and to re-engage the local interface.
So to you, the listener, navigating your own complex map right now, this text is basically a blueprint for taking back control.
Absolutely.
By choosing to turn away from harmful habits, by hitting the hard brakes on the things you know are causing friction, doing the grueling work of repairing the damage, and grounding your daily choices in pure honesty and absolute clarity, you are literally pulling your life out of the mud.
You were doing the work.
You are aligning perfectly with the stable, objective rules of reality. And according to this architecture, that systemic alignment guarantees tranquility, security, and lasting peace. It's not about wallowing in guilt. It's about engineering your trajectory.
It is an active, demanding wake-up call for your intelligence and your agency, not just a passive tax on your emotions.
It really is. It puts the wrench firmly back in your hand. And it leaves me with this one final, provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up today.
Let's hear it.
Think about this. If our psychological and social systems are built with this automatic trajectory reset feature, where the universe actively aids our mechanical course correction the exact moment we choose to shift gears,
Right.
what other heavily emotional or religious concepts in our cultural vocabulary are actually just misunderstood engineering protocols waiting to be decoded?
Oh, wow.
What other master tools are sitting in our toolbox, completely disguised as guilt? Imagine that steady, rhythmic clicking of the clock again.
Tick, tick, tick.
Perfectly synchronized, steady, calm. The glitch is gone. The engine is running flawlessly. You are out of the mud and you are back on the main road. We'll see you on the next deep dive.